Would you like to learn about different options for your child? Are you concerned what's happening in public schools? Well, we're going to talk about some of the solutions today. Hey, everybody, welcome to Education Options TV. I'm your host, David James Rodriguez. And we have a former public school teacher on the show with us today, and a very exciting discussion to follow about her journey to finding unschooling and voluntarism and freedom in general, and actually being a courageous mother and someone who I greatly respect for taking the leap out there and now creating content. And we can talk about your journey there. So before we get into the story, most importantly, welcome Miss Angela Harders.
Thank you, David. I'm so excited to be here and talking with you.
Yeah, it's so cool that I think we've known each other for a couple of years now and connected online. And you've been doing some really cool stuff and, kind of growing rapidly, I would say, on TikTok, and just really engaging with your audience. I think is really powerful, taking advantage of the new media and getting the message out there. And I would say your message is about homeschooling, or I should say unschooling and self-directed learning. You even wrote a book, Tales of a Toxic Teacher. Was that the name of the book?
Yes.
Yes, awesome. Really great reviews online. And thank you for the copy you sent me some time ago. Why don't we talk about your journey to finding unschooling and writing a book, and kind of how you went from sounds maybe a typical public school teacher into an advocate for unschooling.
Yeah. I think every teacher, when we first start our career as teachers, we go into the field of education, not because we want to be rich, not because we want to, roll in the dough or climb a corporate ladder, but because we really want to make a difference with children. And every teacher that I know that's gone into the career has gone in with that intention. And after being a teacher, I've taught actually in the public school system right outside of Washington, D.C. for over 12 years. And within a very short amount of time, I realized that there were a lot of problems in the school that I just had no control over. And I started realizing how toxic the system is intrinsically, to the point that it was having an impact on me and who I was as a human being, and that I wasn't able to be the kind of human that I wanted to be because I was being forced to interact with children in ways that were coercive. And so I left the school system over a year ago. And I've been unschooling my children and unschooling other people's children as well. And it's been a wild ride, but I'm so excited to be able to share from my experience, both as a teacher, as well as an unschooler and a single mom. So, yeah.
Nice. And so how old are your children?
My daughter's 8 and my son is 4.
8 and 4. Beautiful ages, just creative geniuses. And so you pulled them out a year ago and just kind of started doing the unschooling route immediately, or did you go through some phases of homeschooling and schooling at home and this type of thing?
Well, I always wanted to homeschool because I had spent a good portion of my career as a reading teacher, and I really wanted to be the one to teach my own child how to read. I just thought that would be the coolest thing, to be able to teach my own kids. And ironically enough, I still haven't done that. But my daughter did attend public pre-K when she was 4 years old, because I was a single mom and I just didn't think it would be possible for me to homeschool as a single parent. But when my daughter was 4 in her pre-K, she only went for 2 hours a day. And I figured, okay, how bad could this be? It was bad. She literally came home every day just crying that her teacher was yelling at the kids and that the other kids were bullying one another. She was the only child that was mixed. She's half Hispanic and half white. And so they would make a lot of comments to her about her, jokes about her being white. So that was really hard for her. And then one day she came home from the bus with marks on her wrist from her teacher, saying that her teacher had dragged her to timeout. And after that, I was like, we do not do that. We try to practice, peaceful parenting in my home. And so after that, I was like, nope, I don't care what I have to do. I'm going to figure out a way to keep her home. And so I just never sent her back. And around that time, I had planned to do homeschooling, the traditional school at home kind of a thing. I had a whole schedule set up that modeled, the typical school schedule, even with recess. I had planned recess in there for her, which is so, I look back now and I'm like, that is so silly that I did that. But that was my plan and my intention. And thank God I never actually got to implement that plan, because around that time, someone had made a comment. I asked for advice for first-time homeschoolers, and someone just said, research unschooling. And those two words changed my entire life. And that was when I kind of started going down that rabbit hole and reading about John Taylor Gatto and reading John Holt and reading Peter Gray and Pamela Riccia and all these other amazing people that have written incredible books on the subject of self-directed education. And to be honest, I thought it was crazy when I first heard about it. But the scientist in me, I wanted to see if it was possible. I wanted to see, is it really possible that kids can teach themselves, that they can direct their own education, and that they can educate and be learning things in an environment free from force and coercion. And that was kind of the experiment that I set for myself. And I figured I would experiment with it for 1 year. And so I just committed. I was going to take off my teacher hat. And for 1 year, I was going to become a student of my child. And that was it for that 1 year. I wasn't going to plan any lessons. We didn't buy any curriculum. There was nothing. And I just said, I'm going to observe my child for 1 year and see how this goes. Can she learn without me forcing and coercing her learning? And I was blown away. So 4 years later, we're going strong. And I tell everyone, unschooling is the future of education, and it's the best kept secret. And I'm on a mission to make sure it's not a secret anymore.
So you said this is year 4 now?
Yeah, we've been unschooling for 4 years now. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, so beautiful when you find other people who have like kind of gone down this path before us and laid down some crumbs of Peter Gray and Gatto and some of the other folks you mentioned. Holt, right? Holt's the guy who coined the term unschooling 40 years ago. It's like, how come not more people know about it? Well, I think this is probably, like you said, one of the futures of learning, one of the secrets of learning, which is we can direct ourselves and we don't need to be coerced or forced or intimidated or shamed or guilted, any of these things, or even compared. You can even talk about the reading experience if you want, learning, you said 8 and 4. So your child learned to read, I think, but maybe you didn't force them to read, or what was that like?
She did actually. That was my biggest fear, was that I would be the only reading teacher with a child that didn't know how to read. But I had to see, is it possible for kids to learn how to read on their own? And I can proudly say, yes, they can. And as long as your child is in an environment where they're exposed to the written word, they will naturally pick it up as naturally as they learn how to walk and talk and everything else that they have learned how to do. And so, yeah, my daughter taught herself how to read. And it's funny, on my TikTok, I actually made a video. Someone asked me if I knew what her reading level was. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know exactly. I knew that she was reading at or above grade level because I was a reading teacher. So I could tell just by hearing her read and listening and talking with her about her reading. But I wasn't sure what her exact grade level is. So I asked her if it was okay if she wanted to find out what her reading level is, and she said yes. And so I modeled for the TikTok community how to assess your child's reading if they wanted to figure out what their reading level was. And she scored at a 6th grade reading level, and she's supposed to be in 3rd grade, and she's never had a reading lesson in her life, which is really cool. And not only that, but she's 8 years old. She's published 3 books already. She's working on writing her first chapter book. And again, all of it is just out of her passion and her love for storytelling. Like, she's always been a big storyteller. So it's really cool to be able to support her in her passions and in her interests, and just see how she's able to do this, largely on her own, which is really cool.
Now, what was the hardest part for you? Was it the first month or 6 months or 12 months of unschooling, or a year or 2 years? I've had different clients tell me it's taken a couple of years. Some people, a month or 2. What was the most difficult part for you as a teacher, like trying something totally new and letting go of forcing versus kind of letting the child direct herself?
I would say it was probably the first 3 months, I'd say, were really difficult for me. I was really struggling a lot with this thought of, oh my gosh, what if this goes terrible? Or what if I ruin her life? But I think what was comforting for me was I just gave myself 1 year. And I remember telling myself, I can't mess her up so bad in just 1 year. I'm going to experiment with this for 1 year. And if we both hate it, we can always change. And I tell parents that all the time. Like, if committing to a certain philosophy forever sounds overwhelming and scary for you, don't. You don't have to think of it as forever. You can just commit to a year and try it out for a year, see how it goes. And if one or both of you hate it, then make some changes. But I have yet to have a single person try unschooling and tell me that they hated it. Everyone is like, oh my gosh, we love this. I wish that we would have done this earlier. So yeah, that's the first 3 months I struggled a lot with, doubts and doubting myself. But as I started really seeing her learning right before my eyes every day and really beginning to see all of life as learning, that was a really big shift for me too. And that helped to put my mind to ease a little bit.
Yeah, and I noticed the stuff on TikTok is really good because TikTok, I've got kicked off once, so I'm on my second account, and I'm just like, I don't know how long I'm going to be on there, but you're doing really well. And like, you'll post something, and then somebody comments, and then you can actually make a video in response to their comment, and I think that's a really great way for engagement. Have you noticed, like, it's school teachers who are pushing back the most, or who's giving you kind of the most pushback with the freedom-based education, voluntary education? They're like, no, you have to do force. They're like, who's pushing back the most?
Honestly, the parents. I think parents feel this need to like make sure that their child can check all the boxes. And I think as a society, we put a lot of pressure on parents. Like, we measure a child's success by their grades and by their performance in school, very, very largely as a society, I think. And so I think a lot of parents really feel that pressure of like, oh my gosh, if I'm not following a curriculum, or if I'm not making my child do math, then they're never gonna do this, they're never going to learn it, and I'm setting them up to fail. And they have all those, internal fears and doubts and questions and worries. I think in part because most of us have just never seen people or never interacted with people. Maybe they did and we just didn't know it. I think a lot of homeschoolers did do unschooling, but they just didn't talk about it, again, for that fear of judgment or fear of people not understanding what they're doing. Even now, I hear a lot of families say, oh, we don't tell anyone that we're unschooling. We just say we're homeschoolers. So I think even the term unschooling, like I didn't say that we were unschoolers for a long time. That was why I coined the term peaceful world schoolers, because I was like, that term unschooling, I feel like it puts people off. And I felt like peaceful world schoolers more communicated what we were standing for rather than what just we were standing against, namely school. So we call ourselves peaceful world schoolers, but I think it's important that people can know that they do have this as an option. There are more people out there that are doing this than what you might think. And it's an incredible option for families.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see that so many, I think we're probably on the second or third generation, after like Holt and some other people. And I've seen natural learning, child-led learning. I like self-directed learning.
I like that too.
Yeah, that's a really great one I enjoy. And then homeschooling itself, my definition is when a leader creates an atmosphere where personalized learning can occur. So I separate that from school at home, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, I really commend you for not buying any curriculum and, trying to replicate school at home, because that's where a lot of families begin, is they try to, get up with the whiteboard and now do all these things and schedule. And so you maybe leapfrog that from the very beginning. So I would recommend all parents do that if you can. But I've noticed I think the parents are the ones that like have all these fears they're going to ruin their child's life. Or I noticed social pressure is a big one too. Like, reading levels or math levels. And so unfortunately, we've been raised in this school system where we're comparing each other. And it's like, compare what? You might have heard of the guy from Harvard, Howard Gardner, who has all these different types of intelligences, 8 or 9 types of intelligences. And I'm like, that's pretty good. But I think there's like 7 billion types of intelligences, which is you're intelligent in your own way. So am I. So is the listeners and their children. And trying to put a label on them and saying this is who you are, I think is a kind of a big mistake. And it doesn't sound like you hit that problem, because you kind of opened yourself up and did the research, looking at different people's writings and perspectives. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's a very exciting thing as well. Like parents feel like they're all by themselves and no one's there to help them. And you see other parents doing this for 20 years, 30 years, writing books. You just got to have an open mind, is my advice to parents out there, and just realize you're not the first one to like pull your kids out and not force them. This was the way of learning in the past. So that's really exciting. Congratulations on writing the book and making the good content. Some of the people can check your TikTok stuff out. You're just keep putting out really good positive stuff. I think that's really important to realize that we have a solution, and it is the future of education for sure, in my opinion. And just a matter of time until the rest of the planet catches up. Because with these devices, man, I don't know how anybody can justify putting a child in a classroom for 8 hours for 10 months out of the year for 12 years. I mean, I don't know how they do that, other than it's a daycare. So maybe that's a good question too. So how did you do it as a single mother? That's a really important question for other single mothers or fathers out there. They want to homeschool, they have a child or two, but they can't. They're a single income or maybe a 2-income family. How are you able to do that as a single mother?
I get this question a lot, actually. It's probably one of my most asked questions that parents ask me. How do you do this as a single mom? And I think ultimately it comes down to two things. One, increasing your income, and two, decreasing your expenses. So finding a way to either do one of those things, or in my case, I had to do both. So what that looked like for me was my parents have like a 2-level home. And so I actually invested my savings into building a basement apartment where they live. And the area that I live right outside of Washington, D.C. is extremely expensive when it comes to rent and mortgages and things. And so by building a basement apartment for myself and my kids, we're able to live basically rent free, which is really nice. We just have to pay for our utilities. So that was a huge decrease in our expenses, which means that I didn't have to earn as much to be able to, sustain our living and our livelihood. The other thing that I did was I started a business being able to offer unschooling to other families. So for families that had to work, especially during COVID, and they wanted to pull their kids out, I started a private membership association, a private education association, where I would be able to help provide care for families that needed to work. And they would come, with me during the day, and then their parents would be able to work and then homeschool them in the evening if they wanted to do more traditional homeschooling. But we did a fully, unschooled experience during the day, and I planned, trips and activities and stuff. So I was able to be paid to be able to be at home with my kids. So that was another thing that I did. And then also just, being able to find work from home jobs, or, diversify, investing money in other things. So, yeah. And then, of course, building community. That was another really big thing. I partnered with a lot of other single moms in my area, and we would take turns kind of rotating who would take care of the kids for a day. And on the day that someone else would have the kids, then I would use that time to try to work. And I also, you'll notice I make a lot of TikToks really late at night. So after my kids go to bed, I'll spend a lot of time answering, replying to people on TikTok, or, working on writing my next book, or, other things to build my own business too after they're asleep. But it does take some creativity and out of the box thinking, but I truly believe anyone can do this. If this matters enough to you, you will find a way to do it. And I think we can either live based on our commitments or live based on our excuses and our reasons not to do something. And I prefer to live based on my commitments and find ways to make it work.
Amazing. So important. Yes, this is one of the analogies I see. Like, imagine a school building is on fire. It's like, you're not going to try to worry about how to get the child out. You're going to get the child out no matter what. And so with all the crazy sexual curriculum and gender crap and all these things in the school, you're like, and the jabs, oh my goodness, you're like, we got to get the kids out. And so I'm so glad you shared that story. Amazing. Congratulations. Basement apartment, and then just supplementing the income, decreasing expenses. I think that's really valuable information there. So now let me transition into asking about voluntarism, because I love this concept, and I believe it's the future of society in general. So we talk about the future of education, and then we talk about the future of society. Is the most basic concept, but maybe for some of the first-time listeners out there, what is voluntarism, and how did you learn about it, or how did you begin to incorporate this into your mindset and philosophy?
Yeah, so voluntarism, I define voluntarism as the belief and the philosophy that all human interactions should be voluntary. And for me, that it started as, when my children were born, I started learning and reading about gentle parenting and peaceful parenting. And that idea really resonated with me, that my children are human beings and they're unique individuals and they're worthy of love and care and compassion and respect, just like any other human being on the planet. And so growing up and raising my children with that gentle parenting philosophy, eventually when they got to school age, that naturally morphed into unschooling. Because for me, I started thinking, how do I apply these gentle parenting principles when it comes to my child's education? And naturally that leads to unschooling, that they're a unique individual and their education deserves to be treated with autonomy and respect and care and compassion and support and love and free from, punishment and threats and manipulation and humiliation and all these other things.
Yeah, none of them. Yeah.
None of that. And
Yeah.
so, and then again, when we carry that again, that same idea to its logical end, that leads to voluntarism. And actually, you were the one who actually introduced me to that term, David.
Nice.
I don't know if you did that, but yeah, you introduced me to the term, and it just, I was like, yes, this is it. This makes sense. This is not just gentle parenting for children or unschooling for school age children. Voluntarism is gentle parenting for everyone. It's like just treating people like human beings with voluntary interactions, again, free from force and coercion, free from threats, manipulation, all these other aspects that are, intrinsic in abusive relationships where there's power and control. I think one of the biggest books that kind of was a awakening for me was Larkin Rose's book, The Most Dangerous Superstition. That was a really big eye-opener for me, and just kind of seeing the global scale of this, of what happens when we interact with other people out of this power and control dynamic of trying to have power and control over someone else. And when we have this idea, we believe that there's this government entity and that they have a right to interact with us in ways that we aren't allowed to treat any other human being. I can't go to any other human being and demand them to give me money or demand them to, show me papers, or like, I can't do that with anyone else. And yet we give government this supposed authority. And it's just, when we realize like it's all made up, like someone just made that up and that's not real, like that's not actuality, then you're like, wow, okay, it doesn't have to be this way. We can just treat other human beings like human beings with freedom. And and just meditating on that idea and that concept of freedom, like what does it really mean to be free? What does it look like to be free? What does it mean to walk in freedom, and to understand that God has given us freedom? Like the Bible, I'm a Christian, and the Bible talks about that Jesus has set us free. And when we understand what that means, like, why are we living and walking and operating as slaves, thinking that someone else has power and control over us? They don't. And in the same way, like, I don't have control, like my job isn't to control my child, and my job isn't to control anyone else. And so, voluntarism was just kind of the natural flow and that natural extension for me of, gentle parenting carried to unschooling, carried to everyone else. Everyone else deserves to be treated with respect.
Nice. So good. And have you, because I love how you put it on your bio, and I'm curious, has any parents said anything to you about that, or is it like in the comments or something, or what's been the response when you put it in the bio? Anything at all?
No, actually, no one has said anything to me about that, but it's one of those things, like I talk about gentle parenting and unschooling a lot on my page. And I'm starting to be able to talk more openly about voluntarism, but kind of like you, I'm like, I don't want to get kicked off quite yet. I've already had a couple of my videos already like censored on TikTok, so I know that I'm on their radar. So I'm trying to, see how much I can get away with on there. But yeah, I think it's definitely a conversation that's worth having, because ultimately I think it comes down to that question: do you have a right to coerce any other human being, whether that be your child, your spouse, your neighbor, anyone else? When is it acceptable for one human being to force and coerce another human being? And my answer to that question is never. I don't think there's ever a reason, like a time when I should be forcing and coercing anyone else, whether they be a child or an adult. And so again, taking that conclusion to its logical end and kind of putting that question to the world, right? Like, when is that line for you? When do you draw that line and say, I have a right to coerce you to do something? I have a right to threaten you and manipulate you and humiliate you and shame you and interact in these abusive ways with you. And, you know, I think if people were honest with themselves, we know intuitively, like, we don't have a right to do that. We wouldn't accept that from a boss. We wouldn't accept that from a spouse. So why do we accept that from government? And why do we treat our own children in that way? Yeah.
Nice. And were you raised in, let's say, a coercive child environment? Like, did you go to public school, or were you spanked, or did you have any type of coercion put on you, or kind of in a freedom household in general?
I was raised in a Christian household. So both my parents, I tell everyone they loved God and they loved me and they loved the rod. My parents were very firm believers in the rod. And so, yeah, I was spanked a lot, but actually the very first book that I wrote is called Gospel-Based Parenting, and it's my journey into gentle parenting. Ironically enough, because I was reading the Bible, trying to figure out how I could spank my child the way the Bible said, and then I realized the Bible didn't say. But I open up my book by sharing a story about my dad, and I actually say the only spanking that I remember is the one I never got. And even though I was spanked, you know, a bunch of times in my childhood, the only spanking that I remember is the time when my dad chose to show me grace. And instead of spanking me, he told me that he felt like God wanted to teach me a different lesson that day. And he talked to me about how Jesus, you know, took our punishment. And so he was going to take my punishment for me. And so he didn't spank me. He gave me grace. And that was the first time that I understood, like, the grace of God and the power of giving someone grace. And yeah, so I wrote about that. But yes, I grew up in a home that, you know, they spanked me growing up, and I wouldn't have said it was abusive. I know a lot of people try to make that distinction of like, oh, you know, I was in this home where, you know, my parents just, you know, beat my butt every day or whatever. I would not have said that I was abused. Although now looking back, I do see that I do believe that hitting children is abusive. But I would not have said that I was in an abusive household, if that makes sense. I knew that my parents loved me, and yeah, but I think being able to parent differently in front of my parents has been a really interesting experience, because my parents are watching me raise my children in a very different way because I live in the house with them. And so it has definitely brought up a lot of really interesting conversations between us, and just, I think a lot of the pain on my part of, I wonder what my relationship with my parents would have been like if they didn't interact with me in those kinds of coercive ways. I wonder if I would have run to them when I needed help rather than running away from them or trying to hide when I made a mistake, because I was afraid of being punished. So you know, a lot of those questions I feel like I'm wrestling through now with them. But yeah, so that's kind of
amazing. Yeah, I was raised Christian as well, and I got spanked mostly by my mom. My dad spanked me a couple times too, but it was so funny because I remember my mom, she would spank me. I love you, Mom. And then she would say, "This hurts me more than it hurts you."
Oh my gosh. I got that one too.
You got that one too. And
Yeah.
so I don't know, I
You
was
said it.
8 or 9 years old or something. And I'm just like, I'm just getting spanked. And she says that, and I'm just like, I'm so confused. And I think it took me a few years to understand, oh, so she was doing that because she didn't want me to live a bad life. So she's spanking me, but it hurts her because she doesn't want to do it. So there was like you, kind of like some compassion in that they don't want to do it. So anyways, me and my mom are very close now, and you know, have good relationship. And we talk about these things, and she's like, "I'm so sorry, I didn't know
Oh,
there was other ways," and she was overwhelmed. And you know, it's hard to raise a kid in general. So
yeah.
yes, I agree that spanking children is not the way, but our parents are doing the best that they could.
Mhm.
And you know, for any mothers or fathers out there, there's other ways. And
Yeah.
one of the great memes I saw was that if you're hitting your child, no, if your child is not able to understand the reason why you're hitting them, and then and they're not going to understand when you try to explain to them why you're hitting them. You know, it's just abuse, or it's just I would say physical force,
Yeah.
not intentional, but that's what happens. And you know, we're
Mhm.
4 or 5 times larger than our kids, and big giants are like, physically abusing or hitting the kids. And so it's a whole nother conversation, but it's good, I think, to have that open conversation with parents. Say, hey, there's other ways. You never can tell a parent how to raise their own child, but it's like,
Yeah.
hey, I don't know. What do you have any insights on how to open up that conversation if you see a child getting spanked in front of you and you're just like, oh my Lord, other than say, hey man.
I think it depends on the person, but honestly, the first book that I wrote, Gospel-Based Parenting, I really wrote it from that perspective again of it was I wanted to spank my daughter because I believed that that's what I was supposed to do as a Christian. I believed that, spare the rod, spoil the child. I thought that that's what the Bible said because that's what I was told. It wasn't until I actually read the Bible and studied it that I realized that that's not what it says at all. And actually, do you know where that phrase comes from? Spare the rod and spoil the child.
I want to say it was in Proverbs, but I didn't dig deep. I thought, now my understanding is it's like a staff to like pull them across the sheep or something. I don't know. What was your understanding?
Yeah. So a lot of people quote that. They say, spare the rod, spoil the child. And that actually does not come from Proverbs. It actually comes from an erotic poem from the 1600s. And the context of that quote is that there's a dominatrix and she is wanting to engage in sadomasochism with her lover that she's having an affair with. And that is the line that she says to him. She says that love is a boy by poets styled, and spare the rod and spoil the child. She's wanting to basically engage in sadomasochism with him. It has nothing to do with parents spanking their children. It's from this like erotic poem from the 1600s called Hudibras. But so that's like one of the many things I'm like, oh gosh, we need to stop quoting this and saying this is like from the Bible, because it is not from the Bible at all. But for me, I think one of the, going through that book is really helpful. At the end of every chapter, I have questions where I have parents, especially I find that practice is very common in the Christian community because so many people are taught that we're supposed to spank our kids because the Bible says. And so really kind of deconstructing those verses. There are 4 verses in Proverbs that people basically use to take out of context to use as a defense of spanking children and hitting children as a form of discipline. And so the first half of my book kind of deconstructs those 4 verses and it shows why that's not how we should be interpreting those passages at all. And then the second half of my book kind of answers the question, now what? Because, like you mentioned, if that's all you're doing the best that you can, that's the tool that we use, And so I think, if you imagine parenting as this toolbox, we have this parenting toolbox. Well, when you decide that you're not going to use this very popular, quote unquote, effective tool, you're kind of left with, okay, well, now what do I use? Right. So if you don't have any other tools that you know how to use instead of that tool, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail. So I think you brought up a great point, David, of like, it's not just not doing this one thing, but knowing and learning and putting in the effort to learn another way to do this, another way to teach and discipline your children. And that's kind of like the second half of it. So the second half of my book covers that of like the practical strategies of like, okay, I know I'm not going to do this. What do I do instead? What does the Bible actually teach about discipline? How are we supposed to treat and interact with our children? And for me, it was mind-blowing to be able to see that. And again, carry those same principles into my child's education and then into my beliefs about the rest of humanity. So,
yeah, it's so incredible because I learned from the school system and the kind of upbringing that I'm safer if I lie to the teachers, if I lie to my parents. But inside of me, I wanted to be truthful. I wanted to be honest, but like you start to calculate with like your reptilian brain or something. You're like, well, if I say that, then I'm going to get grounded. So it's better just to lie. And so, with self-directed learning, gentle, peaceful parenting, this is the way to build the bonds, right, of trust and love. And it's okay if you make mistakes because that's how we learn, right? This is a whole nother conversation about like, we welcome mistakes in the house. We welcome it because it's okay. What we don't want to do is like cover ourselves and not be able to be our authentic self and say, you know what, I'm afraid about this, or I'm worried, or, I don't know how to do this,
Yeah.
So it's basically upside down, right? Like unschooling or peaceful world schooling, as you call it, is basically complete inversion of what we're taught, but it's actually, in my opinion, is the way forward, because we want to have relationships of trust. We want to have connection and bonds, and who knows what's going to look like in the next 5 years and 10 and 15, 20 years. Absolute, excitement and positive stuff, and also some really dark stuff, with like the World Economic Forum and social credit scores and all this crazy stuff that we are going to have to, I think, address head on. And so maybe you mentioned something about your community. Is that still going? Are you still kind of doing the unschooling like group stuff there, or how are you able to meet other people there in the unschooling community in your area?
Yeah, I have a lot of different ways to connect with people. I think Facebook groups are actually really effective as far as being able to connect with other like-minded people online. But actually, before I talk about that, I wanted to just kind of piggyback off of what you were talking about as far as, the way you were processing, dealing with, lying and wrestling with that idea of like wanting to tell the truth, but also kind of calculating that risk assessment, right? And
Yes.
I think that that's a really important thing for every parent to consider. It was something that I actually thought about early on in my parenting. Was I recognized that the way that I respond to my child today is going to determine the way that they respond to me in the future. And that was so present to me that I am parenting for the long term. I am not parenting for the short term. And if I want my daughter to trust me with the problems of tomorrow, I have to be able to learn how to interact with her in a way that's going to build and foster that trust and connection, like you mentioned today. And so, yeah, I wanted to make sure that I like reiterated that, because that was such a brilliant point that you made. And I think that it's important for parents to like really digest that and process that idea that the way that I'm interacting with my children today is setting the stage for how we together or separately are going to handle problems in the future.
Well, let me
But
ask
yeah,
you a question, because that's
yeah,
I think that's a very important point. Not parenting for the their grades or their achievements, but for the long-term relationship.
mhm.
Um, what would you advise parents, let's say new parents or parents to be, or maybe current parents, but like what is your goal in parenting? What is
Mm.
your intention now, kind of like 4 years into unschooling, and maybe 5 or 7, 8 years into gentle parenting? What is your goals and intention as a peaceful parent?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. And actually, this is one of the very first questions that I talk with parents when I do like coaching and consulting sessions with them. I ask them, like, what do you want to create when it comes to your relationship with your child as a parent? Like, what is it that you want to create? What kind of a person do you want to be? What kind of a parent do you want to be? What kind of a relationship do you want to have with your child? And then what are the actions that you can take that are going to be consistent with that commitment to parent in a way that is, full of love and kindness and trust and empathy and compassion and, all of those kinds of things. Like, I want to be a safe place for my children. I want my children to know that when they have a problem, I'm their first call.
Absolutely,
I don't
yes.
want her to feel like she has to hide things from me. Like, I wanted her to know, if someone threatens, oh, if you do that, I'm going to call your mom. I want her to be like, yeah, call my mom. She's got my back,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
please do. So,
Yes,
and I tell
yes.
her that all the time too. I'm like, if someone says that they're going to call your mom and tell on you, and I ask her, I'm like, are you ever we had a conversation the other day. She came running out and she was like, her and my son were fighting, and they came running out and she was like, Mom, Benjamin's trying to get me in trouble. And I looked at her and I was like, have you ever been in trouble with me? And she kind of paused for a second and she was like, no. And I was like, are you really afraid of being in trouble with me? And she was like, no, I'm not. And I was like, why aren't you afraid of being in trouble? Why are you not worried about being in trouble with me? And she was like, because I know that you love me and you're here to help whenever I have a problem. And I was like, wow. I mean, I wanted to break down and cry. And I'm just like,
That's right.
wow, I never would have been able to say that to my mom ever.
Yeah.
And just that little win, like, she came out, he's going to try to get me in trouble. And then just for her to reflect and be able to consciously say, no, I'm really not worried about being in trouble with you because I know that you're here to help and I know that you've got my back. Like, that's the kind of relationship that I want to have long term,
Beautiful. So
But yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. So So mothers and fathers out there, this is what it is about. It's about the heart connection. And you can do that with school or not school or whatever it is. But the big picture is this trust. And what a glorious and fortunate daughter you have that can say, you know what, my mom's got my back, because when the children move out at age 18 or 22 or whenever, 25, the one thing or two things you want out there, mom and dads, is I can trust my mom and dad and they love me unconditionally. Like if those things are ingrained and re-emphasized, you have hit a home run. You have hit a grand slam, because so many adults out there, they don't want to go back home. They don't want to go hang out with mom and dad on the holidays or whatever, and it's just like, it's really sad, because this is the mother who brought you into the earth and the father who helped. It's like, these are the number one and two who should have your back for sure, no matter what. So I think there's this kind of the golden ticket of childhood is when you have a mother or father who's like you, and his, the goal is to have a relationship. The goal is to have trust and welcoming all things, and it's like, I'm sure there's more curveballs you're going to get, and mom and dads out there, there's a lot of challenges coming, but if you can communicate that to your son or daughter, and that's so beautiful that you kind of paused and let your 8-year-old kind of, reflect, are you afraid of me or not? And then once they get conscious of it, they're like, oh no, I'm not afraid of you. So I probably would have cried myself, because it's just like, that is the whole enchilada right there, to build that trust and safety with the son or daughter.
Yeah, it really is. It was a really powerful moment for me. And I don't know, I wish that more parents would be able to have that opportunity to build that, with their children from the beginning. But I want you to know, whoever's listening, if you have not had that experience with your children up until now, I want you to know it's never too late. It is never too late to turn the ship around and to decide, like, I'm not going to do these things that I have been doing. I'm not going to interact with you in the way that I have been. One of the most powerful things that we can teach our children is the power of an apology, and being able to admit that we're wrong, or that we've done something that we believe is wrong or inconsistent with the kind of person and human being that we want to be. And to, again, voice and vocalize our commitment to our children and say with your words, I commit, I'm going to do this differently. I'm not going to treat you in this way. We're going to change the way that things have been going in here, and really invite them to be a part of that conversation with you. Ask them, what are ways that I interact with you that make you feel like you're not loved, or that you're not supported, or things like that. Like, give them the space to be able to communicate with you and to share. And I think you'll be really surprised what they share. So
yeah, absolutely. This is one of the things that was it maybe our parents, maybe they were taught to be seen and not heard. And my friend Dana Martin has reminded me, and also Peter Gray, I heard him say something similar, but like, this generation is about children's rights. Peter Gray told me in New York a few years ago, he said, the children's rights movement is as important or more important than the civil rights movement, like back in Martin Luther King days. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, you're right. Because the kids are just under absolute abuse and terrorism and all this stuff in the schools mainly, and whole bunch of other things there. So it's very important what you're doing, Angela. I want to thank you. Any closing advice for parents that are on the fence, or maybe to other teachers out there? I mean, my mom was a public school teacher, okay, and I have family members that are in the school system now, so I know there's really good people in the system, and you're one of them. John Gatto was another one, and so there's good people in there. So I'm very careful, because it's not like everybody's bad in there, but there's good teachers out there. So yeah, what do you think to maybe talk with other teachers that are in the system and they see what's going on, and what would be your advice to teachers?
Oh my goodness. There has never been a better time to be an edupreneur, as they call it. There is such a need for teachers outside of the traditional classroom to be able to create something new. Parents are looking for alternative ways to educate their kid, because they're waking up and seeing that the school is an intrinsically abusive environment. It is a toxic environment for their children, and they're wanting to get them out, but they need other alternatives. And I tell all my teacher friends, I'm like, you could literally leave the school system and start a business working with 6 kids in like a small group environment and make more money than you're making in the classroom, like with just 6 kids. And it's, it's better for the teachers, it's better for the kids. But yeah, now is a great time to be able to get out and really think, what do I want to create in the world? What do I want to be a part of? And ultimately, that was why I had to leave myself, because I realized that by continuing to remain in the public school, even if I tried as best as I could to show compassion and empathy and to give my students freedom to choose and all of these other things, the nature of my role as a teacher required me to interact with children in ways that I believe are intrinsically abusive, again, through force and coercion, through threats, manipulation, humiliation. Even though I tried to not do any of those things, that is the nature of my job as a teacher, as a public school teacher, to do those things with children. And so I really had to choose, do I want to be consistent in who I want to be as a human being in the world, or do I want to continue in this job? And ultimately, that's what led me to leaving and to creating something new. And I love what I'm creating and what I see other teachers that are leaving the system creating. So yeah, teachers, don't be afraid to step out. Don't be afraid to let go of your retirement. Don't be afraid to, create something new, because, same thing I tell my students, when you waste your time, you waste your life. And the more time that we invest into these systems that are perpetuating these abuses against children, we could be investing that time and energy into creating something new. And it's time for us to do that.
So valuable. Oh my gosh, so beautiful. It's like, there's so much we talk about. We should probably do another episode at some point, or, work out something. But this is going to be the conversation, I would say, for the coming years for mothers and fathers and teachers. And it's like, there's so many different options and alternatives and ways to do it. You don't have to do what Angela's doing, or me, or other people. You just do what you want to do. And what Gatto taught us is that an education should be as unique as your fingerprints. So it's like, well, how unique are these things? So unique, right? And your child, your son or daughter is so unique out there that you don't have to agree or copy somebody. You can kind of listen to the child. Your child will tell you, and you just got to create that space for them to flourish. And I'm using the metaphor lately of like a garden, or planting a seed, and we water it, but it's up to the sun and the soil. And so you just plant the seeds, mom and dads out there. Your words, your space, your energy is allowing your child to grow. And then soon you'll be like Angela, have your own stuff going, and writing books and really cool things that you're doing. What would you say for parents who are afraid of what all the things that they're afraid of, socialization, curriculum, all that stuff that we hear? What's your advice to parents out there who want to pull their kids out and maybe just need a little bit of encouragement?
Yeah, honestly, I say, let yourself go through all of those fears. Like, whatever your fears are, write them down and really get to the heart of what is behind those fears. And then once you can get to that, really get to the why. I think that was one of the big things for me too, is I started asking myself the question, why, right? Like, why are we having children be in school for 8 hours a day? Why are we forcing them to do homework? Why are we forcing kids to learn how to read when they're 5? Why are we like, and then the who says thing, right? Like, who says that you have to learn the water cycle when you're 7? Who says that you have to learn about algebra 2 when you're 15? Like, who says these things? Who says that algebra 2 is what you need to learn in order to graduate and be a successful human being? Who made up these rules? Someone out there made up all of these things, and none of that is true. Like, my child's unique life path is unique to her, just like you said, David. Like, no one else is going to live her life path but her. And she's on a unique path that is being driven by her passions and her interests and by what she loves and she cares about. And we want our children to live lives where they feel fulfilled and they're doing what they love and they're doing what they feel like they're skilled in, and all of these kinds of things. And that doesn't come through forcing and coercing them to do stuff that they hate all day. And like, it doesn't have to be that way, And so again, let yourself write down all those fears, get to the bottom of of it, really ask yourself those questions, get to the bottom of your why, and then ask yourself, what do I want to create? And then not only what do I want to create, what does my child want to create? What does my child want to do? What do they love? When my child is given free time to pursue whatever they like, what do they naturally gravitate towards? What are their skills? What are their passions? What are their interests? And then how can I support them in that? And then go from there. Like literally don't buy a curriculum, don't buy any of the worksheets, like challenge yourself to look for the learning that your child is doing in whatever activity that may be. And I promise you, you will find it, whether it's Roblox or playing Legos or cooking breakfast with you. Like there is learning that is happening in every moment of every day of their life. And it is valuable learning. And it doesn't have to look like boring worksheets. It doesn't have to look like sitting at home crying over homework. Like it doesn't have to look like any of that. Learning can and should be fun, and we can live our entire life like that.
Yes, absolutely. So true. Yeah, learning cannot be turned off, mom and dad out there. And so thank you for those great words, Angela. And I think we should probably wrap it up before we continue too long. But yeah, let's do this again. And thanks for what you're doing out there, and check her out. But where can people find you to, follow you or buy your stuff or anything like that? Where can they find you online?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and TikTok as @peacefulworldschooler. You can also check out my website, paxministries.com, PAX ministries.com. I also have another website, peacefulworldschoolers.com. You can find all my books. They're all on Amazon as well, so feel free to check those out. I've written over 20 books, but the two that we talked about here were gospel-based parenting, and that's about my journey into gentle parenting as a Christian, and then Tales of a Toxic Teacher, exposing the cycles of abuse within our schools. Both of those books are awesome. So if you read them and you like them, please make sure you leave a review. I would greatly appreciate it so other people can find my work.
Awesome. Yes, Angela, well, thank you for joining us on Education Options TV. We're exploring respectful models of learning to empower parents and children out there. And it's going to take leaders like you to continue to create and write and inspire and make videos. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about you, because you're putting yourself out there, and a lot of people don't understand how difficult it is to actually put yourself out there, and you're doing it. And I'm grateful for you. And anybody out there watching this, if you resonated with what she said, start to create your own stuff and put it out there, because the children are suffering in these day prisons. It is abuse. It is terrible. It's been going on for a long time, and we are the ones we've been waiting for. We have the solutions. It's called voluntary education, and allowing your child to pursue their own interests and passions in life, and go for it. Life is a beautiful thing, and the world is the classroom, and anything you can learn from can be a teacher. So thanks for joining us, Angela, and friends at the Education Options TV, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.